Hello to whoever is watching this. Today I am doing a little book review of the top books that I read this year. And the reason why I'm doing this is because a lot of people like book suggestions, and so I'm just going to give a couple of the ones that I really like this year. And reading is not something that's been very particularly interesting to me growing up, but as of last year, I sort of delved into those genres that were very intriguing to me, and so because of that, I have really enjoyed reading, and reading is something I do 20 minutes before I go to bed every night. And because of that, I feel like I have better quality sleep. And yeah, so let's get started. The first book that I suggest is Meditations, which is a book written by Marcus Aurelius, who was one of the Roman emperors, one of the greatest Roman emperors of all time. And what's interesting about him is he was like I said, one of the greatest Roman emperors, but at the same time, he wrote in a journal some of his thoughts about staying in control, staying mentally sane, I guess. And this is my introduction into Stoic philosophy, and I don't regret reading this book at all. It's definitely one of the best books I've ever read. And because of this book, I view philosophy more so as like a way of life rather than something you just believe in. And Aurelius, what he does, he emphasizes seeking to become one of the most productive and mature versions of yourself because of the idea in Stoicism that death is imminent to all of us, and none of us can escape that. It's a ticking time clock, not in a way that's scary, but in a way to remind you to be intentional with your time. And if I could summarize this in one sentence, I would say this book is to really just accept life's events for what they are and strive for self-control. And one particular message that always sticks with me when I read this book is when he talks about waking up in the morning. He explains how the birds in the sky or the ants in the ground, they don't complain about waking up because their duty is to get to work, and because it's simply just a part of their nature. And I always take this into consideration when I wake up in the morning, because I used to spend 20 minutes just finding an excuse to stay in bed and basically waste my time doing so. And lastly, these meditations teach me to focus on what's an essential thing of life rather than to waste time worrying about things, and waste time specifically on things that I can't control. So things like social media and self-image, things like that. And my only critique with this book is it gets pretty repetitive at times because this is his personal diary, and so he's writing a lot of these things repetitively because he wants to remind himself of the certain things that he wrote in this book. And then the second book that I really enjoyed reading this year, which is pretty controversial, I guess, in the science fiction community, is Dune by Frank Herbert. You might be familiar with the book, with the movie that just came out. Really good movie too. And this is basically a sci-fi dystopian future, and it contains some of the most well thought out, intricate world building that I've ever experienced in a book. Frank Herbert, he's very patient, and he takes his time with the way he lays out the political tensions, the religious aspect of it, the societies, and just the tone of the book in the first few chapters is something I found really, really interesting. And most people find it boring, but I find that when authors lay out their universe in that way, and I just find the book so much more immersive. It's almost like escapism for me. And yeah, there's even a dictionary in the back of the book that I had to personally use a lot because there's a lot of different language in the book that doesn't make sense in our English. But if you look back, it's oh, okay, that's what it means. So that's how well thought out this book was. And a fun fact about Frank Herbert is he actually spent, I think it was 5 years before even writing the book just to lay out how he wants the ecology of the universe to be, which is so cool to me for some reason. And yeah, I was really intrigued by the lore of this book. The only critique that I have, it is very heavy, it's very dense, it's very complex, and I read the first few pages a bunch of times and referred back to the dictionary, which kind of slowed me down. It was a little frustrating. So you had to be really patient with this book, but I promise after the first 100 pages, it picks up and it's definitely worth the journey. So it's definitely a must read for sci-fi fans. And this was actually gifted to me, and I really like the hardcover of this book. It also has some really cool artwork. So that's just the first page. Those are the ornithopters. And yeah, there's even a little map in the back of how the universe is supposed to look. It is so cool. And yeah, this talks about the character descriptions. And Another really cool thing about this book, it's like a minor spoiler, is in the beginning of the chapters, there's a little fake passage, and it really kind of like solidifies the idea that this is a totally different universe, and it's like fake historical passages in the beginning of the chapter. I don't know how that makes sense, but I thought that was really cool for some reason. Another book that I read was 101 Essays That'll Change the Way You Think by Brianna Wiest. I think that's how you say her name. And I'm one of the very few that really enjoyed this book. Most people have bashed the book because the author is young and she's like a quote-unquote Instagram influencer, which carries a negative connotation, which I don't blame. But because of this book, my approach to overall happiness in life and socializing has been very like positively influenced. And as someone who's had a very like lifelong struggle with making friends and finding happiness, this book has definitely taught me to just simply like put yourself out there, even if it terrifies you, rather than staying in your comfort zone. Because your comfort zone, it's a really good concept in this book because it's basically saying it's a prison that keeps you from never experiencing the things that can possibly change your life. And this is the idea that has pushed me to do things like watch horror movies or go out to restaurants alone. And these things are kind of scary to me at first, but they're things I eventually learned to love because of this book. So that's like one of my main takeaways of this book is venturing outside of what you're usually used to, because you're going to find some really beautiful things out there. And I also learned to be a lot more open-minded and be okay with the changes in our lives and for the purpose, because it's all for the purpose of our development. And I also noticed that I find like a lot of pleasure in little things now. So like when I go on like walks with my dogs, or I don't know, the ways like my friends laugh, or like I really like candles now, the way candles smell, and things like that has just like overall increased my quality of life, and I just find happiness in really random things now. And my only issue with this book is I listened to it on Audible, and so the style is quite choppy, and the reason for that is because it's kind of written like a poem. So I would definitely recommend reading it on a hardcover physical copy rather than listen to it, but listening is also pretty cool. And this book is definitely this book is definitely for people who are pretty harsh on themselves and are uncertain on how they can find ways to be a little bit more happy and confident people. So definitely recommend this book to those people. Another book that I read this year was Man Enough by Justin Baldoni, and I am really glad a book like this exists, where it's basically like a biopic where he talks about how men could be vulnerable, and he also talks about his struggles with masculinity as a child and also as an adult. And this book is really just an honest look at the dangers of society's definition of masculinity, and how it's so dangerous to not just boys but also men, like grown men. And the author uncovers a lot of situations where he's praised for sexualizing girls and shamed for crying in front of other boys, which I feel a lot of men can relate to. And yeah, though I don't exactly label myself as like a radical feminist, I now know that like women having a safe world, it starts with men being able to treat them respectfully and checking on them consistently and just allowing them to have a voice. And yeah, men's personal issues are, like, a lot of them are brought to light in this book, such as things like virgin shaming, body dysmorphia, porn addiction, things like that. And I love his message at the end where he says that a lot of men have work to do. And that really struck with me because there's a lot of times where I'd be reading like these self-help books and reading or watching all these self-help videos and being like, okay, yeah, I've done my part, but no, I haven't done really anything. It isn't until I go out there and like really effectively make change, rather than just sit back and like, okay, I did my part, is when, what am I saying? Yeah, but basically there's a lot of work to do. I'm really bad at explaining that. And what he means by this is, okay, I wrote it down. So what he means by this is his need to educate other misled boys and speak out against mistreatment towards women and listen to what they have to say. And I definitely would say that this is a required reading for every boy growing up. It's very important. Yeah, he talks a lot about topics that most people don't want to talk about. Another book that I read this year is The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. And I had a lot of very high expectations for this book since I follow Ryan Holiday on social media, and he posts a lot of helpful advice on specifically procrastinators and lazy people, which is me. And this book sort of covers what Marcus Aurelius already taught in Meditations, and he tied a lot of other historical figures that overcame adversity. So Ulysses S. Grant, he references him a lot, George Washington. And the only thing I really remember from this book is to just accept challenges that come to you, because you gain more life experience that way and endure harder challenges. And I feel like this is a subject that can really just be covered in a YouTube video. Other than that, this book is it's a pretty decent read for people who are attempting to fight procrastination. I think the only reason why I wasn't super satisfied with this book was because I already read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, and so I feel like he kind of copied and pasted a little bit, but other than that, it's a very good read. My second book, why did I say second? Another book that I read this year is Discourses and Selected Writings by Epictetus, who is another Stoic philosopher in the past, and I would say this book is pretty much on par with Meditations, but I still found this book to be pretty profound and very unique. And the biggest difference that I found between these two is that Epictetus, he was actually born a slave, while Aurelius was an emperor. And this book places a lot of heavy emphasis on how we really have no control over our circumstances. And the only thing that we can control is the way we respond to things. And that's my main takeaway from this book for sure. And there's also a lot of discussions on how philosophers are supposed to defy how culture expects us to behave, but are also supposed to be in accordance with logic and reason. And there's also a lot of emphasis on being okay to let go of material things and letting go of people, because nothing is truly ours, but it really belongs to God. And I've grown to really love simple things, but am not too heartbroken when they're broken or lost, because they've served their purpose, and I have already had my experience with that, and I'm grateful that we had that experience. And because it's no longer with me doesn't mean the experience is gone. I still had a very good memory with that. So I highly recommend this book to people who are trying to dive deeper into Stoicism and are looking for more logical approaches to philosophy. Another book that I read is Models by Mark Manson. And the first thing that stood out to me for sure in this book was Manson's writing style, because he writes in a way that makes you feel like you're talking to a close friend, like a really real friend that points out your BS, I would say. And I was initially very hesitant about reading this book because it's categorized as a dating book, which is pretty outside my normal reading genre. But it definitely paid off. And his main points in the book are to revolve around the central idea that if you want to nurture meaningful relationships with people, that you need to be emotionally available and vulnerable. And so it very much disregards the misconceptions that you have of other people and what they tell you about putting on a front to approach somebody. And instead, it does place value in being your most authentic self and growing based off of that, rather than being like, if I'm going to approach this person, I have to act this certain way and say these certain things. And so, I see this more so as a self-improvement book rather than a dating guide. Because after I read it, I found myself to be more confident, and even found myself asking girls on dates, which is not something I normally do. And my only critique with this is in the end, where it slips onto this weird how-to section about physical intimacy, which is a little strange because most people have social cues, I hope, and common sense about that sort of stuff. But other than that, very solid read. And the next book that I'm going to talk about is it's a series of short stories, which is called What We Talk About When We Talk About Love, and it's by author Raymond Carver. And these short stories are very interesting because they don't really have proper conclusions, and they have very ordinary settings. And what's beautiful about these stories is they all have very strong ideas about human nature. And there's also stories, most of the stories in this book are about grief or fear, but most of them kind of revolve around love hence the name, what we talk about when talking about love. And it's definitely something that is better for you to read physically rather than for me to sum it up in my own words, because I can't really explain the writing style of it. It's just something you have to experience on your own. And this book is definitely a very short read. It only took me a few days to finish it. And this is kind of what it looks like. And let's see if I can find it. Yeah, so I wrote a lot of notes towards the ends of the short stories because there's a lot of things that stood out to me, which I like, positive things that stood out to me. Some of my notes are after this one story called The Bath, very interesting name. And the notes that I wrote down were, okay, this might be a kind of spoiler, but if you don't want this spoiled, skip this part. But what I wrote down is, in the face of tragedy, we can be lied in order to attempt to comfort us, and our culture advocates the refusal to acknowledge/accept something unpleasant or tragic. And the last thing I wrote was, indifference to other people's pain is a common theme. And basically, the doctor's incomplete updates on the birthday boy, the baker about the payment, the boy's friends asking about chips. Those were some of the things that I wrote, which don't really make sense until you read it. But very good book. And the last book that I just finished was Dune Messiah, which is a sequel to the Dune series, also written by Frank Herbert. And this is kind of a minor spoiler, but this book covers the 12 years after Paul's reign as emperor, or Muad'Dib, and the effect it had on the people of the universe. And after my very positive experience with the first Dune book, I was very intrigued that this book went in a direction where it was exploring the political maneuvering side of Dune as opposed to the world building side of it. I'm very happy. Sorry, let me say that again. Even though people say that this is the weakest book of the Dune series, I'm happy that they said that because I really enjoyed this book. So meaning the books only get better from here, which I'm very excited because I was recently just gifted Children of Dune by my friend Naya. And so I'm gonna definitely read up on that very soon. And yeah, so with Dune Messiah, it's a relatively short read compared to the rest of the Dune books, but I thoroughly enjoyed the conspiracies. Man, I'm trying to not spoil it. But yeah, there's a lot of conspiracies within the book in terms of people plotting things against the Emperor. And I like how Herbert still expands on the universe with the introduction of some very interesting characters with some very special abilities. And yeah, I think that's all I have to say for the day. The reason why I don't have a lot of the physical copies is because I have an Audible description. So I listened to a lot of these books when I was driving to school and back. And I hope you enjoy these book suggestions. Let me know if you have any questions. Bye.